All right, so it's just after 11 o'clock. Welcome, a big warm welcome to all of our WAG members for being here and part of the conversation once again. We took a break in March, but today's meeting is going to be a little longer than usual. So we've got 11 to 1 p.m. booked, and we hope everyone can stay for that full time frame. For WAG members, if you do need to drop at our typical 12:30 stop time, we understand, but hope you can join for the full time. We have we have extra faces in the room today, so a little larger audience. We have so much content. I don't think we want to do introductions, but want to point out, of course, that we're welcoming back Elizabeth in the room after time away. So yay to see Elizabeth back for our Stormwater program team. And of course, Lori Fea, Dan Dinning, and Austin Samhagi representing the water conservation and stormwater topics. So those are all folks in the conference room.
And Elizabeth is back. Did you say that?
She said that.
Oh, sorry.
Lori.
Yes.
Apparently I need to pay attention in these meetings.
You got the first one.
Oops.
It's
Okay.
deserving of saying twice for sure.
Exactly. Thank you, Aubrey.
And
So
then,
Aubrey, I'm wondering, would it be worthwhile to quickly go through who's in the room just for folks on screen, and particularly like our consultants to know who's here because they don't get to see our names on the screen?
sure. Why don't we start on the left of the U shape in the conference room? I can't
Right.
see who that is.
Somebody
Somebody
Looker's left or Connors left?
I'll start. I'm Tom Headley with Century West Engineering.
Dan Denning, Water Conservation Manager.
Ashley Chamberlain, I'm with Mountain Sky Landscaping.
Should we go back?
Dana Wilson, I'm the business manager for the Water Services Department.
Ian Orand, Public Works Communications.
Elizabeth O'Keefe, Stormwater Program.
Kristen Radlberger, Central Oregon Land Watch.
Lori Fea, Environmental Resources Manager.
Austin Samhagi, Engineering, Water, Stormwater.
Brandon Mastro, Bend Park and Recreation District.
If I talk, does it show my head or do I, oh, maybe I'm.
You can see Brian.
Hi, Mark Buckley on the WAG. I'm an economist.
Yay.
That's
So that's our full crew. All right. Mark's in the
Yes.
blind spot there in the corner. Got it.
There, now it's got me a little bit. I bumped Tom out, sorry.
No worries. All right. So let's look at our agenda real quick. Part one is going to be water conservation. So we've been talking a lot about the Stormwater Master Plan. Today is going to be the better part of our meeting is going to be water conservation focus. Dan is going to start us off with a highlights from the 2024 program. And then we're going to turn things over. We're welcoming a new guest speaker. Madaus is here joining us today. So they're going to talk about the rate research effort that they have are getting underway. And we're going to invite some feedback from WAG members. So we'll get a chance to introduce Carlos here as we get going. There's a discussion time built into that content. And then we're going to shift over to a part two. And that's a chance to come back to our Stormwater Master Plan topic. Quick update on that planning development, and then Trista and team are going to talk through the drainage and density conversation that we've been having, kind of the latest on that, and some additional feedback opportunity from this group. And then we'll close things out. So that's our agenda in a nutshell. We didn't have a chance to meet in March, or didn't need to meet in March, but back in February, we did have a chance to hear from the Stormwater Master Plan team about the draft list of project priorities as part of that planning effort, and got some quick feedback and thumbs up generally from the group, the WAG members. So a good balanced list. There's a couple of snaps from the map and the project list that we went through. As always, the meeting recordings are available through the webpage if anybody didn't get a chance to join us in February and wanted to hear how things turned out. That will be our topic for next month as well, the Stormwater Master Plan. June is going to be a little different. So when we reconvene, just some housekeeping things here. When we reconvene as a group next month, it will be a typical hybrid meeting with Stormwater Program as our main topic. We're going to hear from the Master Plan team, and then also a little bit from Elizabeth on some standards updates. When we meet in June, we'll be doing an in-person meeting, and that will be a chance to see something in person firsthand, to get a chance to talk with other WAG members and just enjoy a little bit of socializing time. We do this, for those of you who've been part of the group for a while, you know the drill, but we take the same time frame that we usually do, so 11 to 12:30. And then if folks want to stick around for lunch, there's a chance just to hopefully get some nice sunny skies and a chance to chat with others after 12:30. So this is an image from our last tour. Hopefully with the weather will be nice like it was when we walked along Newport. And I think Dan and Lori, you guys were just talking about a couple possibilities for the June tour. Do you want to speak to that quickly?
Sure. So can everybody online hear us okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah.
So we've got two options we're looking at right now. One is a city-owned roundabout, the Franklin and 9th Street roundabout, if you're familiar with Bend. We're working with our transportation mobility department to align with our new right-of-way standards that were passed this year. It's one of the last kind of turf intense pieces of right-of-way property that the city owns. Most of it in our new projects has been converted as airscape. So this is an opportunity to kind of highlight for the public what our new standards look like, for us to gather some water savings information. So that is one possibility, weather permitting. We have snow on the ground this week, so it's delaying things a little bit, but that project's moving along pretty nicely. And then the other option was our overturf reservoir site, which is on the west side of Bend, a pretty ponderosa and sagebrush step heavy kind of site, but it's a large site and the city owns the property around our water facility. And with increased concern about wildfire and fire management, fire fuel management, some residents reached out with concerns who live around the surrounding butte. And so we're going to go up and do a fire fuel assessment and create a fire management plan with our fire department. That meeting's happening this week, so that might be kind of another site we could walk through and talk about, managing the water on site. We have native landscape in the water site, and then kind of talking through the management plan and the maintenance plan for fire mitigation up on site. So 2 options, more to come.
Yeah, so we usually do a little RSVP process and try to get a decent count on who wants sandwiches for lunch and who will be attending. And we have generally opened it up if somebody wants to bring along a buddy or a colleague who's also interested in the topic. So more on that to come.
If anybody wants to vote on which one sounds more interesting,
yeah,
we'll take votes too.
Yeah, so fire-wise, water-wise versus kind of turf conversion to natives. Yeah.
Any thoughts from WAG members? What you'd like to see?
Any preferences?
Pretty easy going group, I think.
Free lunch?
I think the Firewise is really interesting right now. I know from like an engineering perspective, where every single time we go to restoration, it's trying to find that balance. And like, that's definitely not like our area of expertise. We like pipes and, rocks and hard stuff. So that's definitely an area that we struggle with, of like finding that appropriate landscape restoration, and we're still looking for it. So that's it's definitely high on my interest.
I would echo that. It's something, that we deal with a lot too, in terms of like how people maintain their own personal property versus how larger land is managed, and kind of having consistent messaging. So
I was going to say that also. I'm always struggling, even personally in my own yard, with balancing all of the green infrastructure, sort of green urban trees, vegetation, all the benefits. Think about soil moisture versus fire risk. And I know we've all got the letters on how we've got to get rid of any excess vegetation from our properties now. So thinking about that.
Well, that sounds like
leaning towards overture.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thank you, guys.
There's a fun story up at Overturf too, we can tell.
Okay.
Oh, okay. And fun stories.
Perfect. All right. So more on that to come. In May will be a standard meeting. We just want to remind folks that we'll do the in-person opportunity here in June. So without further ado, let's turn things over. So Dan is going to kick things off for us here on water conservation.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. So I'll keep it pretty brief. I think I've got like 5 or 6 slides. because we do have Michelle Madaus and Carlos Bustos from Madaus Water Management, and I really want to allow them enough time to get into the rate study project. But just wanted to touch on a couple highlights. We had our one-pager we sent out to the group last month, just kind of a brief recap of what we did. But since we're kind of moving into a reevaluation phase in our program, you know, the pilot phase, the 3-year pilot phase of the rollout of our new incentive measures is kind of coming to a close. I just wanted to kind of give people a brief update on kind of where we're at and what we're seeing. So a few of the big items we completed in 2024 was a big year for us. We added the turf replacement program last year. That was kind of the last phase-in measure, in addition to the indoor-outdoor incentives that we had going. We got through adopting a right-of-way landscape code for private development last year. And then transitioning this year into a look at affordability and equity. Now that we had a few years under our belt of establishing the program processes, kind of looking at who are we reaching and or not reaching, and how can we either shape our messaging or adapt our programs to reach the entire community. So we're working with our Office of Performance Management. Right now we're looking at GIS. We're looking at some census tracts and various layers of census data to kind of get an idea and build some customer characteristics on who's participating and who we need to do some extra outreach to. So hopefully we'll be able to report on that effort next year or this fall or winter. We got a busy summer ahead of us. And then that brings us to kind of why we're here today. So we wanted to take, since we're ending that pilot phase, we wanted to take a look at doing some more projections on water savings potential based off of the savings that we saw and calculated. In 2021, as part of the WMCP, our Water Management Conservation Plan, Madaus used their model to kind of project the savings we would see through various measures, with various inputs on population and growth and housing and all that stuff. And we're going to rerun that model and see how close we were and try to identify areas of changes or program adaptation for us. So that's one piece of the work that we're going to be doing with Madaus. And the second piece you'll hear a little bit more about today is kind of investigating some conservation-based water rates. Next slide, Aubrey. So this may look familiar to some of you. I think you've seen this. Just some highlights here. So this is our gallons per capita per day. This is all of our customer classes, single family, multifamily, commercial included. But one thing you will notice is if you've got a good memory, those numbers look a little different this year. And the primary reason is we get our population data from Portland State, and they did a historical correction in the years of 2020 through 2023. And they actually lowered our population numbers. So then our calculation of GPCD goes up a little bit. We're seeing a general downward trend, a little uptick this year with more water production happening. We're looking at things, higher peak temperatures. We had a higher peak day than a typical year, happening like in June instead of late July this year. We had longer stretches or longer windows of peak day temperatures. That's something we're tracking and looking, and actually over the last few years, we're seeing that trend where our peak days are lasting, 6 to 8 days instead of 2 to 3 days. So some possible reasons of why we saw that uptick in water use. Next slide. So rebate incentives. So the main idea here is we are seeing, and so this is our indoor-outdoor devices. So these are high-efficiency water use devices. We rolled this program out in 2022. after our WMCP adoption, and the main gist of this is we are seeing increased participation from year to year. So we're happy about that. That is a council goal of ours to increase participation in these programs. And we are seeing a positive uptick in water save. So this is not assumed water saved. We're actually calculating the water savings in a post-retrofit year versus a 3-year average prior to the intervention.
Can I ask on this, how often the applications are coming from individual households and businesses versus coming through, a contractor, an irrigation company?
I would say the minority right now are coming through the contractor. At least on the single-family residential side, they have to log in through, so the application form comes through their WaterSmart portal. So they would have to get login credentials for that from the customer in order to do that. On our commercial and multifamily side, though, we are seeing more come through like the property manager. So late in 2024 and now in 2025, we have more sites like Housing Works taking part. We have some of the retirement homes, and those are coming through the third party.
Sorry, is that?
Yeah, I recognize even if maybe the contractor would help a household, they might still have to do the paperwork. So it's probably hard to know precisely. I'm thinking about who's getting the information and making the decisions and sort of.
Yeah, I think primarily it's driven by the customer right now. We did kind of approach in our OLCA meetings with the contractor industry, and it was a little bit like they were unsure how to promote it, right? How do we promote this, and how do we incorporate that into our bids or what have you? So
that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
We've been promoting it at Mountainside.
Have you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
On our website, and I just had 2 people sign up. Actually trained one yesterday.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
For turf removal?
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I know.
So the word is getting out, but yeah, with the devices, I would say that's more like, we're doing a lot of point of sale advertising, signs in Home Depot, in the appliance stores, in the irrigation stores, and then a lot of direct messaging like through the home water use reports. So yeah, but always open to ideas on how to get the outside advocates for us. Yeah.
Sorry, just because for the ECC, for the city's Environment and Climate Committee, we've got this energy navigator that's being developed that the city is putting together to make it easier for households and businesses to see what all the incentives and rebates and sort of trade-offs for investments like heat pumps and these kinds of calculations, how much you might save, what upfront versus long-term costs are, what the world of local and state incentives are. And I don't know if how easy that is, or if there's even a way to potentially combine those efforts at some point. But
Yeah, I'd love to talk.
maybe talk to Cassie about it sometime.
Yeah. Okay, awesome.
Okay. Next slide, Aubrey. Sprinkler inspection. This is one of our baseline programs. This is more of a technical assistance program. So this is based at our residential customers. We're targeting the high water use customers through this one. So we run all of our SFR customers through a water budget and have them broken down into landscape thresholds or sizes of landscapes. And then we take the top 2% and try to recruit those folks in there. Still a viable program, but interestingly enough, you can see that downward trend in average water savings. So we're still saving roughly 4 million gallons a year in that program. But what we're seeing, I think, is a lot of the low-hanging fruit going away as people tend, as we talk about more conservation a little bit more, people are hearing it through different media, through the drought spells we had. I think we're seeing a little bit less excess use even in those targeted customers. Next slide, please. Large landscape, this is primarily commercial customers, HOAs, and then we work with our big 3, which is parks, schools, and our own city event sites. So interesting on the, I guess a highlight would be on the bottom left corner there, that bar graph. Those are those 3 customers. You see the downward trend in use over time as we're working with them and kind of managing the water. at these sites. So it is having an impact. And then if you go to the graph to the right with the blue bars, what we're seeing is a growth in interest, and that's primarily through HOAs. So people that are contacting us to participate, looking for water savings opportunities, but not as big water savings as we're seeing through like parks or schools that are maintaining, 50 some sites. So we're looking at some HOAs that are, maybe 15 to 20 homes with a little piece of common area to, large HOAs with multiple acres of landscape. Next slide, please. And then water waste enforcement is something that, our group handles during the summer months. We've got some success stories from this. We were trying to figure out how to measure this. Do we want to see a reduction in the number of violations? Do we want to see an increase, as we're catching more violations? Or are people, taking the advice and we're going to see a downward trend? We did a lot of proactive outreach through our water use portal, sending notices out to 7 to 8 irrigators. So we could take a batch of, 1,000 people that were identified. We could send one email to this group, notifying them of the code and the repercussions, and pointing them towards resources too, not, just the code enforcement threat, but, giving them options to sign up for sprinkler inspections if they needed help, if they weren't sure how to remedy the situation. And we saw, of those 2,000, I think we saw 1,900 make a change with one email. So it was really great. A lot of people just weren't sure that, or weren't aware that their systems were running that way. Or they had hidden programs, they had a B program they weren't aware of. It was causing them to get triggered or flagged. So that was really successful for us. So I think that is a piece we're going to incorporate and continue going forward. Still have not had to levy a fine. We've had a few summons, 2 summons for court dates, but we were able to remedy the case prior to going to court. So it's been pretty successful for us. Next slide. I think that might be the last one. Yeah. So with that, any questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to turn it over to Carlos and Michelle.
How extreme of a violation gets you into that summons? Is it just because you're not responding? You could be like a 7-day residential irrigator and still get summoned if you continue, or are you looking at like larger commercials for that?
We have kind of like levels of severity. So if it's a residential customer, we'll usually start with what's it's a soft letter, essentially. It's like a warning.
Hey, you probably don't know, but
exactly.
Doing it wrong.
With commercial customers, it goes directly to a notice of violation, and then there's a sequence of kind of escalating pieces that happen from there. But in order to get to a summons, you basically have to blow us off for a month and multiple violation notices. Mm-hmm. There's a 10-day period in between each reinspection or contact we would send them. So you have to be pretty blatantly just ignoring it. Or we've run into instances, where people no longer live at the residence.
So they're not getting
splits, they're not getting the mail. But those just take a little longer to track down. Mm. But it's $450 a day. So it can escalate, the fine amount can escalate pretty quickly. That usually gets people's attention. But if it doesn't, the summons is kind of like the last recourse we have.
Do you ever shut off their water?
No.
Are there cases where there's sort of defiant resistance and you do need an incentive? Or is it really just they usually don't know, or like, oh, whoops, I'm busted?
Yeah, I mean, there's the multitude of like reasons and excuses for it. Most people aren't. I would say what we've tried to do is that in that first inspection, we've tried to remedy it by having them have their landscaper or site representative meet us on site for like the first inspection, rather than trying to explain something that's wrong through an email. We have had some not aggressive, but borderline issues where we had, myself or someone else step in because they were just being abrasive and not really wanting to listen to what we were saying. So I think we had probably 2 of those instances last year. But for the most part, people are just like, oh, wasn't aware, or, I thought that was handled, but I'll get right to it. Thanks for the notice. Usually it's a non-issue, but
That's 2 of the 2,000 emails and 1,900 responses that were positive.
pretty good.
That's
Yeah,
pretty good.
Yeah, that seems
it's
good.
pretty
For
good.
sure.
To a better average.
When we're talking about larger fixes, especially with the commercial though, you're talking about possibly a lot of money being invested to retrofit a site, and that's where we'll usually get pushback.
Got it.
And the water savings isn't as costly as the fine, so that's kind of what we're leveraging right now.
I saw a hand up.
Yep. Hey, Dan, quick question for you. On those letters, could you just maybe summarize, like, how often do you have to put in that fine dollar amount? To almost, you're not issuing a fine, but you're almost sort of like opening their eyes, I don't want to say threatening, but sort of letting them know just the financial repercussions of continued non-compliance. Like, you're putting a dollar amount in some of those notice of violation letters, right?
Right, so the first notice of violation explains the fine amount and the accrual basis. The final notice of violation, so if we don't get any reply from that, the next correspondence would be the final notice of violation, and that gives them kind of the accrued amount that's transpired between those 2 notices.
Yeah, that gets people's attention for sure, right?
Yeah.
And then the other follow-up was, I know on one of the earlier slides, you had the pretty dramatic reduction in the average days to resolve for 23 and 24. Is that down to like a month or 2 months? Like, what's the actual number? I know it wasn't on the slide because it was just kind of formatting. It was a little too small.
Yeah, last year I think we were closer to about 23 days.
Nice.
And again, with those 10-day inspection periods, it's hard to shorten it any once that case gets into city view. But with the Water Smart emails, we saw action within the week. So that was.
Well, this is really encouraging, Dan. I mean, just thinking about the direction we received from the Environment Climate Committee and some of the group that we worked with back in late 21, early 22 around water waste. Some of the direction, some of the things I was thinking about in my head were, enough's enough. The chronic wasters, have to get after it at some point. And I feel like we're really getting traction here, or you guys are with the program. So, yeah, really cool work. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, not to belabor it, but I think that's a great point. Thanks. And what I was thinking about is, are there any, especially at a larger scale, where it would just be seen as a cost of doing business and the penalty wasn't sufficient for deterrence? That's something I've done a lot of work with US DOJ and EPA on sort of penalties on enforcement. And the problem when you have penalties that are the same size for like a household or a huge business, and places where it becomes a part of the cost of doing business because it is a lower cost option to pay fines. But that's not really a circumstance here, it sounds like.
No, I mean, with the commercial, since their first correspondence is usually the notice of violation, they get up into the thousands of dollars a lot quicker than the residential. We kind of did that on purpose, so we weren't, it doesn't help to scare someone, a residential person who can't afford to get a contractor there to fix it, to scare them with like a $4,000 fine.
Sure.
Right? That's not what we wanted to.
And Dan, just to build on that point, like I know the question came up earlier about, do we shut people's water off for waste? No, historically we haven't, because we've always been able to get that voluntary compliance. But I think in that kind of a case where somebody felt like, the cost of doing business was just okay, I feel like we have language in our code around the beneficial use of water where we could go and shut water off if we really wanted to. But that would be a pretty big decision. We haven't had to deal with that a whole lot. Luckily, but I think it is something in the back of our mind that we recognize at some point might be something we have to answer. But good question.
Any other comments or questions from WAG members about what the highlights that Dan shared, program metrics? And if not, we can turn things over to Carlos. So we're doing pretty good on time so far. So we're going to hear a little bit about the work that Carlos and team are getting underway right now. There's a few questions that we want to get WAG input on. that we'll have at the end, and I think a little polling activity as well, just to get some WAG input. And I think we'll be able to do that through phones, I'm assuming, for the folks in the conference room. Carlos, does that make sense?
Yes,
we'll-
that works.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, Dan. Great job. It's a really good program, and I've been enjoying throughout the last couple of years watching you grow, watching the program grow, and expand, and seeing good results. So great job, everyone who's involved. And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you everyone for listening in. I'm the Senior Water Resource Project Manager for Medal's Water Management, and I've been with the company since September 2024. Prior to that, I used to manage the conservation program and irrigation budgets for Albuquerque water system. So I'll be talking a little bit about my experience as we approach today's talk. And hopefully, as Aubrey mentioned, we set some time aside to get your feedback. And that's the main thing that we want to gather today as part of this conversation. Next slide. As Aubrey mentioned, I'm with Medal's Water Management. We're a certified micro small business and woman business enterprise. It was founded by William Medals, is one of the pioneers of water conservation and the water conservation sector in the United States and actually around the world. We're based out of United States, but we do work all over the world. We've been at it for 30 years. We have over 600 projects that we've completed in almost 32 states, I believe, and about 8 countries. We're considered a small firm. We got 9 employees throughout California, Colorado, New Mexico, and New York. And our expertise is in water conservation planning, implementation. We do demand analysis, forecasting. We work with urban water use objectives in California and developing urban water use management plans. And we also have a few publications, including the Water Conservation Guidebook for AWWA, and also the International Water Efficiency Guidebook. So we've been around, and Michelle Medals and Lisa Medals are the current leaders and owners. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to be covering a couple topics. I'll try to be concise and precise with each slide, and we can either have discussions or questions as we navigate through slides, or we can wait till the end. I think we have allowable 20 or 25 minutes at the end to gather feedback and really go in depth into what we're trying to achieve and our next steps. So I'll be reviewing the project scope. Dan alluded to the work that we're doing, and I'll cover a little more in depth, but briefly as well. The related work, which is the one I'm leading, and then going into like the purpose of rates. So I'll be covering all the rates that are included in some of the publications that I'm using as references. Talking about elements of rates, and then Dan is going to jump in and help me cover the current BEN rate structures. And then I'll be comparing some of the common rate types, and then going in depth into the main research, which is understanding budget-based rate types, and then gathering feedback. Next slide. So the project scope, which we've been hired by the Conservation Department to work with, covers 2 main tasks. One is that we're going to be reviewing and refining the city decision support system model. We worked with Dan and his team back in 2020, where we looked at conservation measures. We looked at population growth. We looked at the different customer categories. We also looked at projecting droughts, and then future conservations. And then we plug that into our model, which ultimately projects demand forecasts and what's going to happen in regards to the impact of those conservation measures and future population growth. So that's the first aspect, which Michelle Madaus is leading and working with Dan. I'm going to be focusing on the second task. Next slide. Which is providing a budget-based rate research. I'm not doing a rate study per se. I'm not looking at bands rates, current rates, and seeing how they're functioning in real time, if they're working for a specific customer, if you need to like change them. Basically, my role is to look at other rates and specificity rates that are managed through water budgets and provide that information to Dan and Lori so they can use this information as part of the conversations for the future rate analysis study. As part of this task, I'll be reviewing the best practices for conservation, budget rate design. I'm gathering background on different rate structures, comparing budget-based rate structures, effectiveness, and objectives. And one of the objectives can be like reducing peak demand while maintaining affordability and making sure that rates are equitable. I'll be reviewing recent case studies from a gamma of different utilities all over, mainly the West, but also so mainly from Texas all the way to California, including some utilities that we're starting to look at in Oregon. After that, and this is the main conversation that we're having today, I'm presenting this information to the WAG group, which is today, and we're talking and gathering feedback and looking at different options and how we can structure the next stage of the research, which includes taking those objectives that we'll discuss today and collecting and narrowing down the utilities to 10 utilities. We'll look at those 10 utilities and we'll look at how their budget-based rates function, how they work in real time, in real world, and then we'll provide a report to Dan and Lori. And then from there, we're going to further narrow down those 10 utilities and focus on 3 to 5 utilities where we can take a deeper dive. At that point, we're going to develop some interview questions and talk to other utility managers and ask them questions about why they selected that type of budget-based rate, how is it working, is it something that customers are buying into, is it helping them accomplish the goals that they designed the budget-based rates for, and so forth. As part of this process, I'm working with Dan to really develop those questions, and we're hoping that the feedback that we gathered today is going to further help us continue this research. I'm using the AWWA manual M1, which is the principles of water rates, fees, and charges, as the basis for today's presentation. That's why you'll see over 10 different types of rates that exist. But then I'm going to dive deeper into what are budget-based rates, how they work, and what are the ways, possible ways to like implement them, and so forth. Next slide. Before I jump into the rates, the different rate elements, I'd like to highlight that we've done this type of research for other utilities and municipalities. In Seattle, in Utah, we worked with the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. We looked at 18 utilities in that sector, and we also looked at the city of Bozeman, city of Spokane, Dallas, Portland, and Metro Vancouver. As part of our demand modeling, we looked at their current rates, and we looked at how they structure it and how specifically they're affecting customers in the commercial, industrial, and institutional sector. Next slide. So jumping into the topic, I'd like to first start out by covering the purpose of rates. I'm sure many of you are familiar and why utilities have rates in the first to begin with, why they are important. But just to emphasize, I like to cover that rates are essential for our operations. They ensure financial stability, they ensure operational efficiency, and more importantly, sustainability of our water systems. They're designed to collect enough revenue by the customers that utilities serve in order to cover operating and maintenance needs that are daily, ongoing, 24 hours, and are projected to be maintained perpetually as long as we got cities and urban areas and small towns, and which we all depend on water. The other purpose is to promote equity. So rates need to promote equity. We have a lot of low income, fixed income customers within our service areas. So we got to make sure that as we're designing rate structures, we got to make sure that customers, and particularly the vulnerable populations, are not disproportionately burdened by the types of rates. At the same time, a well-designed rate structure ensures that a customer pays a fair share of how much water they're using. And that's to benefit the system, but also just to benefit the service area at large. Another purpose is to encourage conservation and efficient water use. Rates send a price signal for customers, signaling the value of water, and also signaling that water can be scarce in some region. Some of our supplies may be vulnerable, and some of that vulnerability may be due to drought, lower snowpack caused by climate change, lower precipitation, changing climate, but also sometimes operation needs. Our pumps burned out, our system sometimes leaks. So there's all sorts of scarcity issues that are caused by potential earthquakes and so forth. So sending a sense of price signal to customers about the value of water. It also supports capital improvements and system resiliency by providing revenue, much needed revenue for capital improvements, such as replacing aging pipes, which we all have, upgrading treatment facilities, and expanding future capacity or growth. And ultimately, it provides for financial stability. The rates should reflect the true cost of delivering water, but also it should help customers understand that water is not free. Next slide. So when we're looking at rates, there's some specific elements that are important to consider. When establishing water rates, utilities need to carefully balance all these multiple factors to ensure that rates are not only providing the much needed revenue for operation and maintenance, but also they should be fair, they should be equitable, they should be sustainable, and they should be politically and financially sound. In regards to cost of service, rates should support the utility's financial health. They should ensure the revenue requirements align with long-term financial planning, including future asset management and infrastructure goals. In regards to affordability and equity, when we're looking at rates, we should analyze the impact of rates on low-income households and vulnerable populations. In regards to demand management goals, there's always the main balance between maintaining stable revenues and also incentivizing conservation so you can expand, extend, and maintain a healthy supply source. In regards to political and regulatory, that always comes into play. So you must consider the public and political process. As part of that, stakeholder involvement, council, commissioners' involvement is key and to having a sustainable rate structure. And then as you're rolling out different rates, if you decide to go with a budget-based rates for your irrigation-only accounts, for example, you must ensure transparency. Ultimately, a healthy rate structure can help you be competitive as well for bringing in business by allowing for economic growth through the sector of water. Any brewery that wants to establish in Bend is going to need water. Any industrial facility that requires like database requires a lot of water. If you have a healthy source of water, they're going to look at Bend for potential future economic business growth in those areas. So having a healthy rate structure just really strikes that balance in long-term sustainability and the growth of and sustainable and resiliency of Bend as a city. Next slide. So Dan, if you want to cover this, please.
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. So our current rate structure that we have now is simply one structure. We have a single price volumetric rate that we apply to all water use. Currently it's $2.25 per 100 cubic feet within the city of Bend. We do have a little more expensive rate outside of the city limits. So that would be like to the west of us, we have some areas around Tetherow that we're serving water to. That's a slightly higher rate. This changed from our previous rate, which included 400 cubic feet along with the base rate. So you pay your base rate or your meter charge, and along with that, you were able to use 400 cubic feet without any additional charge, and then it was calculated volumetrically. Every customer class, single family residential, multifamily, or commercial, is set up and billed the same way. So that's an important distinction with our rate. And then the only one that varies a little bit differently is with our bulk water delivery or hydrant meters used for construction or supplemental water at some sites in the summer. Those have gone out. There's a setup fee and then a monthly charge for that. So this is just like the monthly charges for the water right now. This isn't like an SDC charge or anything like that. Any questions on this?
Does anybody have a 12-inch meter?
Oh, the hospital does.
Is that?
Yep. So St. Charles has a 12-inch. I think the other big ones like Pilot Butte Middle School has an 8-inch. But most of the time we'll see 2 inches being irrigation. So schools, parks, like dedicated irrigation meters are going to be our 2-inch and commercial customers. I think we do have one residential customer with a 2-inch in, out by the old Miller Tree Farm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But a majority of the residential are going to be in that 3/4 to 1-inch meter. And then I should mention, not rate so much, but we used to let, I think, and Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, we used to let people kind of choose what size meter they wanted when they were building the house. Like this is, I think, way back in history, but so I think we've changed, we've grown through our processes.
I think we allow for the spec one nominal size smaller than your service. So if you have a 1-inch, you can go 3/4. If you have a 2, you can do a 1.5. So I think that's where the spec sits now.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to burn those out. City owns them.
Okay.
Cool. And this is a great example of, unless there's other questions, I'll jump in. And
yeah, go for it.
Cool. So next slide, please. This is the types of rates that you currently have. It's a great example of the combination of two types of different rates structures, where you got a rate that covers a fixed price per unit, but you also have a base charge for your meters. And typically, utilities develop the structure because the base covers your regular operation and maintenance, or could potentially be managed and designed to cover whenever a new meter comes in play, a new customer, or there's a continual capital improvements and operational needs, then your base can cover those, like your like staff salary, for example. And then the fixed price per unit is something that you can forecast using demand models to really design your financial sustainability year to year. So I'll cover, I believe I got 11 types of different rate structures. I'll cover them, and then I'll focus on the budget base rates, and we'll dive deeper into those. But the AWWA manual, which you can use as reference, and you can get familiar with if you're going to be involved in the future rate study, it outlines several types of rate structure. One of them being the uniform rate, which is the one that has a fixed price per unit of water. It can be by gallons, or it can be by units, CCF, HCF. Regardless of the total volume use, you always get that fixed price per unit. This tends to be really typical in both residential, but also somewhat in commercial billing, and not necessarily for large irrigation users. They can be effective, but typically we like to think that they're not as effective in regards to managing demand pressures that come during times of shortage and droughts. The other one is a really common nowadays is the inclining block tier rate. The price per unit of water increases as usage increases. So typically you'll see 3 different tiers. The first tier may be the first 8 HCF, maybe at $2.40. And then once you double that amount, it might go up to like $4.80. And then subsequently, if you use 3 times the amount of water of your base, determined during winter, for example, then that third tier will bump your price up to like 3 times higher. This can provide surplus, particularly in times of higher demand, when your system is functioning for longer periods, when your energy use goes up, and when your pumps are more vulnerable. They're very effective at discouraging excessive use during peak periods. We do see that at the beginning, when they're first rolled out, there's a lot of customers that push back. Eventually, you see a lot of demand go down, and after 20-25 years, those customers that were going to be encouraged by the different tier structures, they're impacted and they respond, and then after that they start responding less. Next slide. The other one was really popular, surprisingly, in the 80s and the 90s, and this was a declining block rate. It actually encouraged large users to use more. The more you use, the lower your price. And that was really to encourage growth, attract large users into cities. I don't think anybody's using this type of structure in the US now, but I thought I'd mention it, not to persuade you to use it, but just as an informational piece, because it does exist and it has been used in the past. The fourth rate that is the seasonal rate. And that's something that we use in Albuquerque, for example. We got a mix of different rates. And during the winter time, between December and March, we look at indoor use. And based on that, we set what's called your conservation charge. And basically, that's your efficient use, where you have an average of how many units you're using during those 4 months. That average is used to determine your sewer rate for the rest of the year, and it's also used to determine your efficient use. And then once we go into start the irrigation season in April, Then if you start using more than 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times your winter average, then you start going into like not necessarily penalties, but you do start paying more for the water that you use in different tiers. And actually Albuquerque is going to be one of the case studies that we're going to be looking at as part of this research. Next slide. Just to jump back, sorry. On the seasonal rate, they can be really effective, particularly in managing summer, a higher peak demand, because it sends the signal, and it's really clear because it shows to the customer how much you typically use indoor during the winter versus how much water you're using in the summer months. It can discourage a customer from having high water use turfgrass, for example, and transforming and participating in the Xeriscape program to lower that demand and get it back to what their normal use is indoor, or at least get it from tier 3 to tier 2 and subsequently to tier 1. Next slide. The next one is the drought shortage rates. These ones are typically included in a drought shortage management plan. Do you have one of those, Dan?
We have a curtailment
like a
plan.
drought management plan?
Curtailment, yeah. No, not necessarily drought, yeah.
Okay, so but you have a plan. So typically what I've seen is that utilities include drought shortage rates in stage 2, for example. Typically stage 1 could be more about like managing irrigation, the 3 days per week, for example, or 1 day per week. And then as they start moving into like different drought stages, like stage 2, stage 3, then the usage can have a surcharge apply to that rate to discourage excessive use. The good thing about having this drought surcharge, or sometimes referred to as emergency rates, is that typically in times of drought, high demand, higher temperature, your system is operating at 24 hours. Your pumps could give out. Your treatment facilities may require more energy use. So having that extra surcharge can be a safeguard for system operation needs and so forth. Now, if you do decide to at some point implement this type of surcharges in times of drought, you should think about protecting low and fixed income customers by identifying them and trying to mitigate and maybe tailoring your audits and free giveaways and toilet replacement and so forth to low income and fixed income customers. The next one is a conservation oriented rates. Basically, you get a low cost block rate at the beginning, which is sometimes referred to as the lifeline, or the efficient water use line, where you look at a set of like what's efficient in regards to Bend, Oregon. So it might be 1.28 gallons per flush indoor. It might be that you can consider things as having weather-based controllers, irrigation efficiency nozzles, and spray bodies. And based on that, you set up a low-cost block rate. And as you start moving beyond that, then each level can have a different rate that's applicable to that given use. It provides a safety net for essential water needs. So if you understand your water usage at your home and you keep it within that essential water use lifeline or water efficient line, then you should not incur in higher rates. But if you go beyond that, then you start going into like the non-efficient or excessive user, and at that point, you can look at whether you got any leaks or any malfunctioning or any inefficiency in your property, and you can contact the conservation department to seek help. It's really effective in curbing excessive use above basic needs. And that basic need is really specific and tailored to your service area. Next one. The next one is a flat rate. Also, this one exists. I used to work with the National Rural Water. I see this all over rural areas, especially in small towns where everybody knows each other. And sometimes it's amazing. You run into like flat rates that are $5 per month. And they still exist today. At least here in New Mexico, you'll find a small public water system where everybody just pays $5, and you see their reservoir tank is leaking, their pump is supported by duct tape, and they still charge $5 per month because that's the price that was set up 40 years ago when they got that free well and free system from their state reps, and now they continue to charge that flat rate. So I'm not encouraging it, but I do want to put it out there because it can be really ineffective because for one thing, there's no feedback loop. Where I do see flat rates really more established is where they don't have service meters. So there's really not that feedback loop in regards to how much their customers are using. So it's a lot easier to just say, I'm going to charge $25 per month, $35 per month. And based on that, we're able to maintain some form of revenue to maintain our system, pay our operator, and plan for the future. So there are special cases where flat rates may be needed, but you have service points and you have production meters and everything's metered. So you won't necessarily have to go that route. The other one is a minimum charge or base charge. Is a fixed monthly charge. It's often designed to recover your fixed costs, such as customer service, meter reading. It can provide for capital improvement funding and support stable funding for fixed infrastructure and debt services. What I do see and what the AWWA manual recommends is to use a combined rate structure, such as the one that Penn has. And right now you got a rate or fixed rate per unit, and then you got a base charge per meter. You can potentially implement a fixed charge that will cover your operational needs and something that will cover capital improvements and your long-term asset management goals. You could consider to implement a budget base rate just for large users, for irrigation only accounts if you have those, and those specific irrigation only customers will not pay sewer because it's assumed that they don't use sewer and they only use outdoor usage. And then you can implement a tier rate structure for them where you give them a given budget. And then at the end of the year, if they go above that threshold, then they can fall into like different types of tiers. So sometimes it's a combination of everything, and that's what I see more widely used. So I'll jump into the next topic, which is the bulk of what we're going to be looking at when we're looking at other utilities. And Aubrey, how much time I have? Am I doing good?
I think you're doing pretty good. We've got like 20 or so minutes remaining, 23.
And that's before questions?
With time for questions in that.
Okay, cool. All right. So I think I'd like to get feedback. So I won't speed over the last slides, but yes. So the next set of rates that I'll focus on are really two types of budget-based rate types. And what are these? These are also called water budget rates. And it's basically customized rate structure for each customer. Each customer is allocated a specific amount, and that's considered to be their budget. It's like our budget at our bank, or our budget every time we get paid. Based on that, we got a structure of who we owe, how much money we got, how much I can put aside for vacation, how much I can consider eating out. So think about it in that way. But in this case, is a water budget and a structure specifically for customers. It can look at indoor. It can look at outdoor. Some budgets look at indoor and outdoor. Some budgets just look at outdoor use. They're typically tailored to include factors such as household size, how many people live in the house. You can use latest census information to customize the amount of people that live in a house. They look at the landscape area. They look at ET, evapotranspiration rates. Look at different weather conditions, so seasonal, winter versus the summer, spring, the fall. And then they look at specific customer types: single family residential, commercial, industrial, irrigation only. Next slide. In essence, there's two main types of water budget rates. One is the indoor outdoor. Typically, this you see it whenever there's one type of meter. There's only 1 meter supplying a commercial site, or a multifamily that may have multiple buildings, or a single family residential. And in this case, if it's a commercial or a single family or any type of customer, you will look at the number of people that use that property. It can be seasonal, or it can be like permanent. And this may vary from single family residential to your commercial, industrial, institutional, multifamily customers. And then based on that, you come up with a standard gallons per person per day. And that can be 50 gallons per person per day. It can be 30 gallons per person per day. It's a factor that you can determine based on existing data, or you can also base a factor on what you want to achieve in the future. So if right now your GPCD is 169 and you want to get to the point where it's 120, then you can factor that in to your budget for indoor use. And then for outdoor, the goal is to really understand the landscape. Sometimes you can do assumptions. You can do assumptions such as they have 50% low water use plants and 50% high water use plant. And you can ultimately use available information to understand watering needs and come up with a budget. You can make assumptions about average lot size, or you can do more customized geographical examination and landscape classification, which I'll touch on. And then there's the other type of water budget rate, which is specifically for irrigation purposes. That's the one we have in Albuquerque, for example. We have here in Albuquerque, there's over 3,000 customers, 400 properties, because each property, 3,000 meters, 400 properties, because some properties may have more than 1 meter. That's typically the case for irrigation only accounts, like parks, large schools, and so forth, medians, and so forth, right-of-ways, for example. And that's a little bit more in depth. You look at the landscape area, plant type, you look at climate, and then based on that, you come up with a budget for that specific facility. It encourages efficient landscape irrigation only for landscape irrigation customers, because it lets them know this is your allowable budget. This is how much you should be watering. You can develop tools to help them on a monthly basis to track that water use. And ultimately, it encourages to look at their water use more in depth by examining on a regular basis for leaks and malfunctions. It's really successful. Just with irrigation only accounts, Albuquerque saw like a 6% drop in demand in 8 years by focusing on those accounts. How do they work? So you establish the budget, then you develop a tier rate, and that's where you start combining. You allow for basic needs. That's your tier 1. Tier 2 covers the inefficient use. So if you're above of what you should be using, and then if you're using 3 times more or 4 times more, you fall into excessive use. At that point, you're charging more. When implementing these, it's really important to allow customers to request adjustments and have a variance period. Typically, what I've seen both in urban water district in California and also in Albuquerque is that they provide a budget and then they allow a year for the customer to respond with their actual measurements and household size of their property. Next slide. They can be very effective. Next slide, please. Yeah, so budget rates can be very effective and regions that experience a high outdoor irrigation demand or where water scarcity is a concern. Utilities that have a strong EIS system and customer data capabilities is an asset as you're rolling out because you have a lot of information in-house. And also effective in areas that experience droughts or climate change. The pros, it promotes water use efficiency, equity, and fairness. If done accurately, it recognizes that all customers don't have the same needs. It provides affordability protection because Tier 1 allows for the essential needs, while the others encourage coming back to that essential water use. And more importantly, in the conservation world, which is where we come from, it can help with managing demand and during high season and reducing peak demand. It encourages sustainable landscaping because if you got a given budget and you want to reduce the water use, you can go from high water use turf grass to desert-friendly landscapes and so forth. Some of the cons, it can be costly to implement. We've seen the range of developing and undergoing rate structure development, providing outreach, could range from $160,000 to $260,000. Once you implement it, then you got to keep track of those budgets. So it does require different types of just managing data and ongoing and conversations and educating those customers. It can be struggling for customers to understand at first, but once the budget is established, especially with an effective campaign and education outreach, typically customers respond to their water budgets. Next slide. And while they can be...
Carlos?
Yeah.
I want to do just a quick time check. You have 14 minutes total left.
Okay. I think I got 2 slides.
Question. Okay.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So while water budgets can be somewhat complex, sometimes technically to upgrade, and they can be somewhat challenging at the beginning in crafting. Ultimately, the main important thing is that they can help a utility balance revenue stability. They can encourage conservation, and with a good outreach educational campaign, you can have a great public acceptance in regards to how you're portrayed as a utility and managing water, particularly for outdoor users. One thing to highlight out of this slide is if you do decide and go on that route, implement a strong education and marketing campaign. specifically for those customers that are going to be affected by the new budget base. That's something that I'll make sure to include in the report that I'm giving to the city of Bend as part of like a rolling out and an effective implementation. Next slide. Actually, I got this one and one more. Well, I'll cover this one briefly. So there is some impacts, positive and somewhat that can be challenging at the beginning. They do support affordability because you ensure that basic needs are covered. There might be some potential equity concerns if budget allocations aren't accurate, and that's why you need to allow for waivers and variances and adjustments. When it comes to capital improvement, depending on the type of rates, you may need additional metering for irrigation-only accounts if you're going that route, but it seems like you got your meter rates covered. But ultimately, it can be really effective in reducing outdoor demand and overall demand if you plan it out right, if you implement it right. And more importantly, it can still help you in covering for operational and maintenance needs. So conservation is no longer a loss in utility revenues. It can be actual gains in utility revenues if you plan it out and design it properly. We're looking at, next slide, and this is my last one. We're looking at 19 utilities right now. It's just a list that we've been adding through a conversation that we've had with Dan, our internal research that we've done. Ultimately, we're going to narrow this list to 10 utilities and focus on understanding a little bit more about how their rate structures work and what are the different functions and objectives of these utilities, and ultimately zoom in deeper to work with 3 or 5 utilities and interviewing them and asking them more in-depth questions about affordability, meeting peak demand, financial and capital sustainability, and so forth. And that's my last slide. And I think, Aubrey, rather than playing around with the poll, because it may not work, maybe we can jump into the questions and discussions, if that's okay.
Let's go there. So these were the 3 questions that we also included in the agenda packet as a preview. So we wanted to just spend some time talking about, getting WAG member reactions to what challenges and benefits you see with these different types of budget-based rates. Have some time to talk through that. Also curious about what objectives do WAG folks feel are most important when evaluating these different options and thinking about how they might or might not apply to Bend. So, what might some of those key objectives be to help weigh the pros and cons? And then what questions, if any, WAG members want to say, definitely get this question in when you talk to these other utilities who are trying these budget-based rates to just understand how they're working in the field and what might be going well or not so well with implementation of those. So we can open it up to the floor. If anybody has any big picture, challenges or benefits of using these types of rates.
Well, I'll jump in. This is Mark. I think you answered this, Carlos, but in terms of dealing with budgets for households with heavy irrigation property versus xeriscape or something else, it feels like from the incentive you described, generally you would aim towards that budget being built around the low irrigation landscape. And just wondering what kind of tensions there are with households, or if there's sort of transition periods, or maybe this is also a question for the city, how they've thought about how that budget is allocated and potentially transitions over time, if that's a factor.
Yeah, I can speak to what we're doing now with budgets, and that might be helpful. So with single family residential, we did a lot of GIS work just figuring out, percentage of landscape in different size lots. Then what's the composition? What's the percentage of turf versus shrub? And to basically build like a weighted coefficient for that site. And then where we did kind of what you're saying kind of allude to, like pushing towards efficiency, is when we get to the irrigation efficiency piece, the lower the efficiency, the higher the budget's going to be. So we put a higher efficiency that we're trying to get people to achieve at 70% to kind of drive them towards the budget for that incentive piece, but still provide enough water for the plant material. When we run those budgets, I mean, we still have people that are, 400% over that budget. So about 30% of our customers right now in single family residential can't meet a budget, or they're not adhering, they're using more water than that budget we provided. We just wanted to kind of see that temperature of like, well, where are people falling, right?
So this is just an analysis of what it might look like.
Right, so this is what we're doing now in order to identify the customers we need to talk to, right? So that something similar could be incorporated into what Carlos is talking about. We would have to decide as a utility, like, what are we driving them towards and how quickly, I think, do we want to get there? Is that accurate, Carlos?
That's super accurate. And that's part of like the conversation that, we're hoping to support with looking at how other utilities, what were their goals and objectives, because ultimately you can design your budget based on inefficient use or efficient use or a high water use, or you can develop your budget such as the way Dan is doing it, where you're encouraging efficient use and reducing that demand to meet the needs of the landscape and not go above. So.
And I want to be clear for everybody that what Dan's talking about, he's doing these budgets to look at people to call up and say, hey, you use a lot of water, can we work with you to reduce it? Mm-hmm. Which is, we don't currently use it for our rates.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be like an idea that could move us towards rates.
Or like targeted. And it's super, that alone is a great program to implement.
I got a question when it goes to in-house budgeting. Did you come across a lot of municipalities that like really get into that grain of detail about like how many occupants they have? I mean, like looking at our community, we have a lot of seasonal workers. I wonder how much of the community is like permanent versus like every 1 to 2 years moves in or out. It's such a growing, changing community. People have kids, things change. So, when you're to break it down to that granular level, like, each independent customer is getting billed accordingly, like that seems like a never ending tail chase. So do you just assume something and then if you're over or under on your actual household count, then you just it is what it is? Or it just seems like that in-house budget would be hard to base equitably with legitimate data and not just have that be an everlasting check.
No, that's a great point, and I'm writing it down as a question to ask utilities how they're coming up with property size and property users, either transient or seasonal or permanent. What I've seen is that, as you mentioned, some communities decide to do an assumption based out of the data that's provided by the most recent census. That works really well for single family residential. Others decide to do actual surveys, and they do survey and they survey their customers to identify how many people per household, how many the capacity of a given property to estimate more accurately how many people the indoor use. And then the same with outdoor. Some communities and utilities are using their GIS department to conduct actual land classification, while others are just using public available data to determine lot size and building footprint. And then based on that, they're doing some assumptions of how much is high water use, and then how much is low water use. But that's a great questions to ask, because that can help us determine how it can be more done effectively here in Bend.
And maybe in our context,
I'm going to cut off staff people because we'll have a chance to that with WAG members.
Well, I think that's a great question. And I was thinking about this also because of resident visitor continuums. And high rates of vacant housing. And from the case study perspective, it'd be great to look at a community that has a high rate of vacant homes, second homes, that also has a water budget based rate structure. I don't know if, I can't remember that list now, if any of them look, Bozeman would be a good example, but I don't know if there were others. I guess Fort Collins a little, maybe Santa Barbara, but, Boulder a little bit, yeah. Yeah, Bozeman, I don't know. If Bozeman
Great
has-
feedback. Yep.
Do these all have budget-based rate structures, these 19 on the chart?
Not all 19, because the one in Oregon, that's less common. I think actually Ben might be the first one if you decide to go this route. We looked at all the main cities. And ultimately we identified these 4 utilities within Oregon that are looking at budget-based rates, or currently have irrigation-only accounts, which could potentially lead to having budget-based rates. But then the other utilities, the ones in California, San Antonio Water System, Albuquerque, Fort Collins, they all have a type of budget-based rate, either for all their customers or for irrigation-only accounts.
We have last couple of minutes, we have other WAG folks who have some thoughts right now. You can also send us stuff as you think about this more.
Please.
One question that came up on as I was looking through that list is, I think you mentioned this too, is you'll talk about with these 10 or so that you choose, their experiences in having implemented these. As you noted, it could be really expensive, from $160,000 to $260,000 to implement these programs. What would be their sense, or I'd be interested in knowing what the sense of staff burden was relative to their staff on hand. So right now you've got very dedicated city staff that are really taking a strong charge on being proactive and doing a lot of outreach. When you take this whole new effort and plop it on top of what you're already doing, do those communities feel like they had adequate staff at their numbers, or could they have used a dedicated hire or something else? And then after that period of implementation, so give it 2 or 3 years, is the maintenance what they expected for the staff involvement and just the level of time, the amount of time that you're going to take, because it pays off. And Ben is proving right now that the city is willing to put the resources in to do these activities. Will there be enough staff available to implement it as well, based on the experiences of the 10 or so 5 that you interviewed?
That's
So I
great.
know Mike has his hand raised, but Mike, I just want to make sure, because we have to switch over to stormwater. Is there any other WAG members who have a comment or a question they want to make?
I think just kind of bouncing off of that, like, I think finding kind of a happy medium between like finding as much water conservation as we can get, and like matching it to use and per customer, but also not putting in loads and loads and loads of work and effort and money into, saving a few extra gallons here and there. I think I think this is a really great undertaking. I think kind of finding that balance for the city so it's not burdensome.
Point taken.
Okay, so if there aren't other WAG members, we could probably have Mike talk really quick. This is me cutting my boss off, so everybody just, so you know.
No. It's everybody knows it's hard for me not to jump in here. No, one thing I would just be curious about from those other cities, especially the ones in Oregon, is what have they done, if anything, to revisit their reserves policies around financial reserves. And so as you dive into this, that's something I would be curious about. I know that as we look at our long-term revenues, that's something that we're thinking about. Do we need to update the amount of money we have in the bank account in case things go wrong? Anyway, just something to look forward to. Thanks, Lori.
Awesome.
And if anyone online has like, I really want to hear from this one or that one, you can put it in the chat or email, and then we can, take that in consideration on, who we select for the top 10.
Cool. So I'm thinking, Aubrey, maybe right after this meeting, I mean, we always post the slides, but it takes us a few days. So maybe, Aubrey, if you could follow up with an email to the group that maybe attaches at least the key slides. And then folks could think about if they have more questions. 'Cause I guess this is a lot to digest. So you might think about something later. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Great input.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you. Thanks, appreciate it, Carlos. Maybe as a super fast question for you, is the city basically at a point where you're probably moving forward with a budget-based rate and then it'll be designing that, or you're still going to be weighing that decision?
We're just looking
considering
at
the
options, yeah.
Okay.
Not to complicate things further, but, one of the things as, we see these downward trends in GPD and you're trying to balance, your conservation needs and long-term, water availability and I mean, we have a demand problem, right? Not a water supply problem, right? So we're trying to manage growth within the water that we have allocated. And so you get to a point, especially with larger customers, and I think I kind of mentioned this with the commercial customers where, the cost of action is so much more than the payback in water that, there needs to be that incentive and that value increase. And maybe it's just for irrigation only customers, right? Maybe that's the way or who we want to address first, but there's a lot of inaction happening because you look at, a 20-year payback on something. And so I think finding that right balance to incentivize the next step of where we need to go is something I'm interested in looking at.
Yeah, that'll be key for what Mike and Tom are raising about what the cost of this actually would be in the long term.
Yeah.
What the return on that is, yeah.
Okay, well, let's jump to the next topic. I appreciate people being willing to stay an extra half hour to be able to hear. Particularly, we've got some really good discussions going on about drainage and density, and I'm excited for us to talk about that.
Great. Trista, are you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Perfect. There you are. All right.
All right.
Popped up on my screen yet. So we're going to get a quick update from Trista on drainage and density and kind of the master planning process. And then I think this will also be an opportunity where we can take some additional offline feedback after our meeting today.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Again, Trista Kobleski with OTAC, and you've heard from me a number of times over this past year or so about the update to the city's stormwater master plan. And thanks, Aubrey, for doing the slides for me. So we will just jump in. I'm not going to do a lot of background on the stormwater master plan. Today, we're talking about the drainage and density topic. You heard Austin and Lori presented the concept of this to you in, I believe it was January. So a few months down the road, we have started investigating whether City of Bend's current stormwater standards and regulations are a little bit too limiting for the amount of growth and the amount of density in urban development that Bend is experiencing. And if so, what might be some other options? So that's what this topic is about. And we are still in the midst of it. So everything we're discussing today is draft. We're still vetting some of our findings with city staff. We're still taking community input, like through this venue, for example. So and look, it's an old slide and it still says UPAG. I just noticed that now. So our focus questions for WAG, not UPAG, for today are these three. Just generally, do you support eliminating barriers to managing stormwater in a more centralized fashion within subdivisions rather than on each lot? Would the Bend community support allowing some private runoff to be managed in public streets in facilities owned and operated by the city, especially residential runoff, or maybe especially from infill? And in your experience outside of Bend, are you aware of a successful regional stormwater facility or regional stormwater plan constructed by a city that is used to meet stormwater requirements for redevelopment projects? So just kind of think about those as we're talking today. Next slide, please. And yep, we can skip that one. So what are the reasons some of this is happening? rapid growth, a need for a diversity of housing options, increasing density of development overall, focus on economic development by the city. For example, in the core area, some of the redevelopment plans call for, say, a zero lot line or close to zero lot line redevelopment standards. Where would a stormwater facility go on that site? So those are some of the context that is leading to this discussion. Next slide, please. So if we take a look quickly at the default method or pattern of stormwater management in Bend right now, the standards call for maintaining all stormwater runoff on the lot of origin. So in a residential subdivision, most stormwater facilities, therefore, are actually located on the residential lot. They are managing the private runoff, and the individual property owner would own it. That's if in a single family or a duplex type situation. In a townhome situation, a residential townhome subdivision, the HOA might own it, but the stormwater facilities would still be located, in a person's backyard or in their front yard. And in a non-residential site development situation, and for the purposes of our topic here, this includes multifamily apartment buildings, for example, the stormwater facilities might be located on the lot, the parcel, and located in the parking lot or in a landscaped area. Again, generally only handling private runoff, none of the street runoff. So any frontage improvements would require a separate stormwater facility to manage street runoff. And this is usually a commercial property owner or, the property manager is owning or managing this facility. And in infill, T-courts, home sites in areas of existing development where the street pattern is already set, the stormwater facilities are on a lot, managing private runoff again, either owned by an individual property owner, a commercial property owner, or the HOA for the infill development. And public projects, including frontage development constructed by private developers, are only managing runoff from the right-of-way. Public runoff, in other words, they're located in the right-of-way in the street generally, and the facility owner is the city. So that's the general pattern as it exists now. And if you go to the next slide, we think that has some limitations. Small residential lots don't have a lot of room for these lot by lot stormwater facilities. They might end up with a lot of stormwater facility in their yard and not much yard or not much landscaping area. And this on-site pattern really isn't compatible with zero lot line development. In the permitting realm, numerous small facilities might be using simplified calculations and assumptions over a subdivision to go into the engineering calculations for the facilities. Imagine the field test cost and the inspection cost for 39 or 40 individual facilities on a subdivision. That could be prohibitive or perhaps not comprehensively done. And then this leaves stormwater facilities in a subdivision scenario to be constructed by builders who are more typically focused on building the structure of the home. And then from an operation perspective, this leaves lots of individuals in charge of managing stormwater facilities. They might be underground, they might be hard to see, they might be quite hard to inspect or maintain by an individual person or even by an HOA or even by a commercial property owner. This is kind of a specialty area and not something that your typical individual knows how to do. Even surface stormwater facilities, they might look like landscaping, and if they're in your backyard, you might think it can just be filled in, and you would then lose the function of that facility. go ahead. And this is just one example. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but if this residential development were built as it was laid out here, and I did not confirm that, but this, you can see each of these townhome lots has in the backyard a patio, shed, a little shed, and then the entire rest of the backyard is taken up by what's called this depressed or rear yard depression, which is actually a stormwater swale. So there's not really much spot to recreate or use your yard recreationally. And then in the front, there's also a stormwater facility kind of off the front porch in each of these. And this, again, results in something like 38 privately owned stormwater facilities for one development. This development also happens to have an existing kind of more centralized stormwater facility over on the west side. It's off the picture, and that was present in the existing condition. So I think this illustrates some of the limitations of the current pattern.
Maybe just like two more things to point out. It's either your whole backyard is one giant swale, or it's in a place where it's hard to see that whether or not it persists, through the first year. So it's one where either the homeowner doesn't really have great, use of their backyard, if you will, or the city may be left with like a nuisance resident that, filled in their swale, which is more likely the case.
Yeah. And if the city had an inspection obligation on these, if they needed to confirm that they were working, these are in people's backyards. That can be invasive. That can feel invasive. So, just some things to think about there on that. So one of the concepts we are exploring is whether the city's current code allows more centralized options for stormwater management, and we're looking at this there's several types of land uses, but I think the one I personally feel is most relevant is for residential. So we're kind of focusing on that today. Doesn't mean we're not looking at commercial also, but just for the sake of time and simplicity today, we'll kind of look at residential. So if we could centralize a stormwater facility on a tract or an individual lot, in a residential subdivision, whether that's single family, townhome, or something like that, where would that stormwater facility be? It would probably be on a tract or an individual lot, maybe a combination of those two things. Maybe there are still some individual lots, home sites that have a smaller stormwater facility, and then in addition, a centralized stormwater facility. Should there be options for that centralized stormwater management facility, not just to manage the private runoff from the lots, but also the public runoff from the street? That would make the layout of the utility system far simpler. And, we know stormwater drainage relies on gravity. We're not installing pump systems. So facilitating a simpler layout and not working against gravity would help simplify this. In this case, would the facility owner generally be the homeowners association? So we would need to rely on a homeowners association to form in order to do that. And that could potentially be approved through a type 2 land division, followed by the engineering review. And there are some options for non-residential site development. It doesn't, those that have a parking lot or landscaping, they already are able to do this. Infill, we need to understand the options for this a little better. We just had a conversation with some of the city staff yesterday and think we got some more insight about how centralizing options could work on infill, but we haven't had a chance to update our draft white paper or our thoughts about that yet today. So still working on that. And then we have some ideas about public projects, being able to negotiate with their neighbors, maybe City of Bend working together with Bend Park and Recreation District or with ODOT or another public agency to where they could coordinate stormwater management, centralize on adjacent public facilities, and that could perhaps be worked out through negotiations. All right. If you want to go to the next slide, we want to point out there are already some examples of centralized stormwater management in Bend, and then we have kind of a comparable one on the bottom right from the Portland area. So what we've found so far is that these centralized ponds are allowed through the master planning process. There appear to also be code provisions that allow this in Title 16 without going through a master planning process, but it appears those provisions aren't used very often. And so we are exploring whether the reasons for that are procedural or lack of knowledge that these provisions exist. But we want these examples here are kind of what we'd like to promote or at least allow more often as an outcome of this study. And that could, you know, that won't happen immediately. I think our recommendations coming out of this study will be code changes that you could look into, procedural changes that you could consider implementing, maybe training or advertising the existing flexibility. So those steps, you know, would take the next several months or a year or two to actually implement and require a coordination among different city departments as well as the, you know, communication with the community. So I think as we wrap up the master plan, what you'll see is some recommendations for next steps, things to think about, maybe some recommended language, but that's still quite draft, but still concepts to consider. Okay. I do want to leave a few minutes for questions and responses to those. So if we could move
and
on.
Trista, can I make a quick clarification? Is just that when we're talking the term master plan here, we're not talking about like the stormwater master plan. We're talking about master plan is a land use term that we have for larger subdivisions. That it's an
master plan development.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. I did not make that. I did not.
We should be using different terms for, yeah.
Yeah, comprehensive stormwater plan. Okay. So there are potentially some barriers or potentially some surprising existing allowances to some of these centralized on-site stormwater management options. Again, in Title 16, there are a couple of sections, 1615 040A has three subsections, 4, 6, and 8, that for various reasons under various circumstances allow stormwater runoff to leave the lot of origin and be managed elsewhere, especially in residential subdivisions. And again, we're kind of still studying why these provisions aren't used that often. And we've noticed that there's not a lot of discussion or any discussion formally in the application forms or the FAQ forms for pre-application of stormwater. So perhaps this topic can be considered earlier in the land division process. We wanted to ask if WAG members are aware of other procedural barriers or lack of information about that. And then there might be some funding barriers. When a developer, and we're talking about a larger land division here, when a developer sells the lots to the builders, there might be a financial disincentive to centralize the stormwater management because the developer can allow that responsibility to fall to the builder and build those facilities on their lot. There's less of a barrier probably if the developer is also the builder. And then next slide, Aubrey. So the current code and standards, Title 16 does emphasize, so does the Central Oregon Stormwater Manual, that runoff should remain on the lot of origin. It does offer other options, which are not commonly used. Master plan developments have explicitly listed options for commingling public and private runoff, for managing stormwater runoff not on the lot of origin. So in master plan developments, they are more common. We are wondering if that language that has been adopted for several of the master plans recently could be applicable citywide with a code change. Master plan developments have longer review times, so that could be a barrier as well. Not every subdivision wants to go that route. And then when the developer sells the lots to builders, again in a residential subdivision scenario, what are the mechanisms for ensuring that centralized stormwater management facility maintains erosion control through the life of the building cycle for all the lots? How long does the developer have control over it? When does it get turned over to the HOA? Does the HOA actually form? And we're still studying that. And let's see what the last slide is. I think we're about out of time, so I won't go into this, but we are also talking about some options for allowing stormwater to be managed in the right-of-way in a public street. There are some code provisions that do allow this. It's not preferred. We have heard from city staff that if we do allow this more, or if we explore this route, any stormwater facility in a public street has to be owned, operated, maintained, and locatable by the city. So we would, of course, keep that tenant in mind when making any recommendations. And there are barriers to that. We'll skip that slide. And then there we go. The kind of last thing we are looking at as part of this white paper is options for regional stormwater management. There's overlap between the concept of centralized on-site stormwater management with the regional stormwater management. I would say the biggest difference is when we're talking about regional stormwater management, we're more thinking of a facility built in advance, often by the city through some sort of funding mechanism, or a developer who establishes a reimbursement district or something like that, that supports a redevelopment area to allow like Central Core to have that zero lot line development where they don't have to put stormwater facilities on individual lots as they redevelop and use the full lot to the lot lines. What would be the process for that? So we have studied other regional stormwater management options that have been successful elsewhere, kind of mostly focusing on the Portland area and the Seattle area at this point. So we would be interested in any feedback from WAG about regional stormwater facility systems that you are aware of in Central Oregon that have been successful, if you are aware of any. And there are advantages and disadvantages to those. We'll just skip the next few slides given our lack of time. And I think I've basically covered what our very early recommendations are to consider changing some of the policies and procedures. One thing I haven't covered is the technical standard. This is on our last slide. Give more options for stormwater facility types or best management practices that can be used. So we're looking as part of the master plan at ways to allow deep dry wells and stormwater trees as additional stormwater facility types that may give more flexibility. And then just evaluate the trade-offs. If stormwater is allowed to be managed in the right-of-way, that means more public facilities. What is the impact to the city's stormwater fund, their operation and maintenance workload, their staffing, and those sorts of trade-offs? So again, we are in the midst of considering all these things and have some of these early thoughts, and would be happy to hear if you have any experiences or responses to what you've heard today. In 3 minutes, sorry, I didn't leave much time.
And definitely, we have time for a couple comments here. And then on both of these topics, we can circulate the questions that we wanted to cover today and a selection of the slides to the group. And you can provide input offline too.
Yeah, maybe you want to go back to that slide of the questions. It's slide number 36.
Yeah. I think we generally know the answer to the first one. Do we support eliminating barriers to managing stormwater in a more centralized fashion? I think we heard in January and through the meeting a few weeks ago that this group does support this concept in general.
What do you guys think about like the commingling of private and public runoff? Like as a general, any objections or?
And if so, you know, there's the like, can you commingle it and then it's managed privately on a private facility by like an HOA? That's the couple of examples we have now. The other example would be if it's commingling, should it be a public facility and managed therefore by the city, which has financial implications. But it might be better long-term to ensure proper maintenance. So just any thoughts on that?
I recall the discussion pointing to where if there's public runoff in a facility, then that's managed by the public entity. But one thought that comes to mind too is that if the private runoff that's moving into a publicly managed facility is that favoritism to a small group of people that just happen to be lucky enough to have their stormwater managed by the rest of the city.
Equity.
Right, so the messaging, I think, and again, I remember we had this discussion, I think it was in January, where the reasons would really need to be transparent. And this isn't favoritism or an inequitable solution. This is an engineering slope topography driven, the physics don't allow for any other solution but this. And then if that system is documented, that process is documented clearly, then you're still going to get the person who comes through and says, I don't like it. But at least for everybody else who has a sensible view toward things, they can see, okay, I understand. This was all the other processes were tried or evaluated and did not work. And the physics of water going downhill puts us in this situation.
Yeah, wouldn't you still charge them? You could still charge them, right?
That's all the stuff that needs to be talked
true.
about.
We could assess that
Like,
group that is.
do you have a series of rates or do you do one rate and how much does that?
Right. I mean, sometimes what I've typically found in other locations is that stormwater fees are the low end of our utility fees, right? So we really don't charge very much money.
Mm-hmm.
And so we charge like $7.55 or something like that per month for residents. So when you look at it from that scale, if we start saying, well, we're going to charge you more if you have a facility to maintain or not, the concept of how much utility billing effort there is to regulate that versus saying, we're just going to charge everybody across the city 20 cents more per month. I think we'll have to look at that as well. But I do think there's an equity component. It could be, like you said, like only in certain cases, or it could be like it's only a certain type of facility.
Right. Excuse me, this room is reserved for another meeting at this time.
For Drexel's meeting. Yeah. He's coming in to get the snacks.
Okay.
But it could be like the type of facility, like maybe we're okay with taking care of a few more dry wells in the right of way, but maybe we're not okay with taking care of a bunch of ponds. We can make that.
And like one thing, like looking at like Luderman, for example, one of the few, well, there may be an argument to make that like we reduce city UICs within the street because we're allowing that city right away to run into that. So like there's different contexts that could actually be less of a burden on the city, but.
Could you charge it as a proportion of flows entering this proposed facility?
But that's where it gets to is like, is it worth like getting?
Is it worth the complication and utility billing to do it is the question we have to ask ourselves. So I'm gonna have to cut this off because we have another meeting. I mean, this is such a great topic. So again, we're gonna send out the slides. Please put some thought into what your thoughts about where we're heading and does that make sense and what other issues do you have? Please let us know. More to come in May and June. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. This was a fun meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Perfect, my battery's running low.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.